Hi Facebookers, it's Steve Barrett here. We're about to record our weekly podcast. Got a fantastic guest this week, Michael Sneed from J&J, heads up their global corporate communications and is global CCO. So great to have you with us, Michael. And we'll talk to Michael for about 10-15 minutes. Then we'll pick up on some topical subjects, which there are always plenty to talk about, and this week is no different. And Frank Washkuch is here to help us with that. How you doing, Frank?
I'm well. Thanks for having me on, Steve.
It's a pleasure. And yeah, that's it. If you've got any comments, preferably nice ones, or constructive ones anyway, please append them to the Facebook stream or even ask a question. Otherwise, we will get going when Webmaster Perry gives us the signal. Hello and welcome to the PR Week, PR Week's regular weekly roundup of everything that matters in the worlds of PR and communications. My name's Steve Barrett. I'm the VP Editorial Director of PR Week, and I guide you through the next 25-30 minutes as we chat to a fantastic guest this week. We've got Michael Sneed, who's Worldwide VP for Global Corporate Affairs, as well as CCO at Johnson & Johnson. Michael, welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Thank you, Steve. Great to be here.
Yeah. I haven't seen you for a while, actually, so it's good to catch up.
Good to see your face.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've got Frank Washkuch, News Director Extraordinaire of PR Week. How are you doing, Frank?
I'm doing much better after that very kind introduction.
Well, you know, you're the linchpin that holds this show and indeed the PR Week editorial team.
It's far too kind, but thank you.
Yeah. So, yeah, we got plenty to talk about. Sanofi, what a tweet that was, wasn't it? That was like shutting it down in 140 characters.
It was.
Yeah, it was a good one. So we'll talk about that and the whole Roseanne thing. More departures at Burson, Cohn & Wolfe, principally among the Burson parts of the operation, if truth be told. We'll talk about that. Starbucks did its racial bias training on Tuesday afternoon, and we had some cameras outside our local Starbucks to see what consumers thought of that and whether they knew about it, actually. It was an interesting video that Perry Simpson and Diana Bradley put together. And Martin Sorrell, you can't keep him down. He's got a new venture, S4 Capital, which is a bit like that Shell organisation. Do you remember it? Wire and plastic products. Whatever happened to that? Did quite well with that, didn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did quite well. So is he going to do that again? We'll chat about that and anything else that catches our attention. But, Michael, let's start with you. Heading up a global function on a $76 billion company.
Correct.
How do you go about doing that? And, you know, I think we wrote maybe 3 years ago that under Maggie Fitzpatrick that you were having a look at it in general, and everyone's having a look at the function. Tell us how you've sort of progressed it since Maggie left and how you've put the building blocks in place to deal with this sort of complex modern world that communications and marketers have to deal with.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Steve. You know, one of the things I think it's key for any company these days is to be incredibly agile. And one, and two, to really understand the capabilities that you're going to need to operate in this modern world. And so we've really gone about doing exactly that, looking at our capabilities, understanding what are the ones that we need to really operate effectively in the world in which we compete, and then making sure that our strategies really align with the strategic priorities of the organization. So as a result, we've built a lot of capabilities in terms of content management, in terms of data analytics, but we still haven't forgotten like the tried and true capabilities around just good communications, good PR, but things like social influencers. You know, these are all the things that you have to have in your bag, so to speak, in order to remain relevant.
Absolutely.
In a fast-moving world.
It is a fast-moving world, and you talked about that content offer. How did you do that? Did you hire a bunch of journalists, broadcast journalists, etc.? And how do you dovetail with marketing on that? You've got and the brands as well, because you've obviously got very distinct parts of the business. Three very not disparate but different. And Alison Lewis is your high-profile CMO.
Right.
Right. How do you and Alison work together, and how does the content function work within that?
So just to start from the beginning in terms of your questions, we actually went out and we hired a number of journalists, former journalists, to build what we call the content lab. and really what is a group of...
Thank you for giving some journalists a good home, by the way. There's not as many opportunities out there for us.
They're an impressive bunch.
Yeah, well, some of us.
But they've all come together, and there's probably about a dozen of them. And they really are cutting edge, I think, in terms of what they're doing on behalf of the J&J brand, but also all of our brands in terms of developing our stories and getting them into the right channels. And also building our own channels. So in today's world, it's about self-publishing.
Yeah.
It's about using our channels, making sure that our voice is out there. So I think that's been a real step forward. I think as it relates to comms and marketing, clearly, as you say, I work very closely with Allison because communications and marketing is really starting to merge. And you can't do one without the other. And in fact, one of the things that we're starting to build now is a marketing communications capability, because we really do. They're not separate. They're not in separate lanes. You know, when I was coming through the industry, marketing was over here, communications was there. I didn't really talk. You can't do that today. So fortunately, I've got a great partner in Allison, and we're moving pretty aggressively with ways to just deliver our messaging and to do it in a way that's engaging with our consumers, regardless of how you do that. And so more and more, you've got to have that 360-degree approach and just get your messages to where our consumers are, where our customers are, 24/7.
But you're also well regulated, being a healthcare company and being a pharma company. I mean, so
we are,
yeah,
and so that presents some hurdles as well.
Yeah.
So we certainly in my role and our folks, we have to work very closely with our legal team. Mm-hmm. And I'd say, fortunately, we've got a great legal team headed by our chief counsel, and he and I both have a philosophy of how do you get to yes. So as opposed to no, 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 how do you get to yes? How can we make this work in a way that can maintain the integrity, make sure that we're not outside of the regulatory frameworks in which we have to work through. But I will say, what's great about J&J, and you referenced the fact that we are in medical devices, we're in pharma, we're in consumer, there's a tremendous amount of cross-learning. So our consumer people learn a lot from our more regulated products about how to navigate that space, because in some parts of our business that's happening more and more. At the same time, we have our medical device and our farm people learning a lot about how do you deal directly with patients. How do you treat them like consumers, even though they are patients? It's all got to be done within the regulatory framework. But I think we, more often than not, we get to a good place. And look, we're never going to be the cowboys out there doing crazy things. But I do think people recognize we're all trying to do the same thing, which is to try and improve health for all of our consumers.
You've got the
and patients.
flexibility to do that.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
Looking at your baby care range, you're making some changes there. Had some challenger brands coming into the space. Everyone remembers Johnson's baby products.
Yes.
We all grew up with them. And you have to keep that brand fresh, don't you, and alive.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about what you're doing with that, because that will probably, I guess, play in with the content and working with marketing.
It will.
Case study,
It's Steve, it's a great case study because, not only is it an iconic brand, but as you say, in many ways, it defines Johnson & Johnson, the enterprise brand. So there is a lot of interaction and back and forth between the corporate folks like myself and the brand. And one of the things that I think has been great for the Johnson's baby brand is to understand that great brands always have the opportunity to remain great, but you've got to constantly change. And I would say we took the Johnson's brand almost for granted because it has been around for a lot of years. It's well known. But at the same time, that's often when you are in your most dangerous period. And so to your point, we did get a lot of upstarts, and it caused us to really, I would say, strip down our thinking about the brand right down to the ground. And we've rebuilt that business with new ingredients, with all new packaging, with a new positioning, with a real modern look and feel, and a way, I think, of talking to consumers, which you'll see very shortly, that really does set the stage and I think returns the Johnson's brand to real leadership.
What's the timing on that? When can we sort of, is it?
It'll happen
August?
in July.
Okay,
July,
so
yep.
that's something to look out
very,
for.
very shortly.
And how does the comms function play into that? You know, there's an obvious role for the marketers and the brands, but tell us how the comms
Sure.
function sort of plays
No,
into
it's critical. I mean, in fact, I would say the communications team led by Sandy Pound, they have been really locked arm in arm with our marketing folks on the global side, since this is really a global restage. And I would say every strategy, every marketing and communication plan, that's something that's really been co-developed. And again, back to the earlier point, this is around how do you reach our consumers. And in our case, it's mothers to be, mothers thinking about being mothers. So how do you reach them? And you have to think about the whole suite of assets that you have to be able to do that. So when I look at our plans, you know, it's hard for me to actually distinguish between, well, where did that come from comms, did that come from marketing? You know, it's actually very hard for me to tell.
That's good.
What's important is it on strategy? Is it having the impact that we expect it to have?
It is yeah, because you have some organizations where the functions run on parallel lines, don't they, and they don't really interact.
Yeah, and that's, I'll tell you, in this day and age, that's a very dangerous place to be.
Yeah, sure.
Things move so quickly. And what's great, you know, what's nice about communications, and I think one of the many values that they bring, is that oftentimes they really do have their ear to the ground when it comes to, you know, trends and how to distinguish between, you know, the noise and the signal. And not that marketers don't, but marketers have a lot of other things they have got to have challenges with. And I, you know, myself coming out of marketing, you know, I knew that I was never as in tune with perhaps the outside world, where our communications people, you know, they're almost born with that sixth sense of understanding where do you have to pivot, but more importantly, where do you have to anticipate where things are headed. And I think the best organizations really take the best of both functions and both disciplines and operate those pretty seamlessly.
And of course, one area where the marketers tend to maybe disappear is when there's a crisis on, you know, and they sort of over to the PR function to sort this out for
Well,
us.
you do get a little of that, yeah, you do get a
The
little of
tumbleweed
that.
blows through the marketing department. So that's still, you talked about the core corporate reputation crisis,
Yeah.
internal, you know, that stuff is still super important, media
Oh my
relations.
gosh, yes.
So yeah, how do you sort of get the balance right so you don't forget about that and still got all the heavy lifting stuff as well?
So I think that's actually a place where we have advanced the most in the last several years. I would say that in many ways J&J was not unlike a lot of other companies, where a lot of what we did in crisis communication was very reactive. You kind of wait for something to develop and then, okay, let's, you know, all get into action and deal with it. You know, we've tried to take a much more proactive approach, frankly, by developing greater analytics. A few years ago, we actually developed our own what we would say intelligence system, the global reputation intelligence system, that really allowed us to hunt and to seek out all the conversations that were happening literally around the world, so we could better understand what was being talked about with regard to Johnson & Johnson. And then as we've built that database, we can then do pretty sophisticated modeling to understand what issues are actually going to bubble up enough that we've got to take action versus something that's just going to stay, you know, really below the surface. And it's allowed us, and frankly, after a few, I would say, times where we've gotten burned by things we didn't see coming, now there's rarely an issue where we hadn't seen it coming 3, 4, 5, 6 months earlier, and now we're able to put a plan in place and be ready when it actually happens.
Did that happen with the talcum powder sort of issue that sort of...
Yeah, I think talc was one of the things that not that it certainly didn't take us by surprise, but because it was really more in the legal realm, we, you know, as we started to have some of the verdicts come in, I think we were, I would say we were surprised by the notoriety some of those things were getting. And so that was certainly one of the impetus. But we've had, J&J is a big company. we've got issues that happen around the
All the
world
time,
daily.
yeah.
And so we felt we needed to get a little bit more of a framework and order. Otherwise, you literally are just running around with no structure and no process. And so this has given us not only an opportunity to really see things, but more importantly, to start putting plans in place. So for our Johnson's baby powder business, we've been very deliberate in taking a different tack and strategy where we've not gone silent. We've been out there with our key stakeholders, particularly moms, to really present, the facts as we see them. And, like any good organization, we've been able to track, sentiment and impressions around how people are feeling about our baby business and powder business in general. And we've seen that turn around. So we know that armed with, the right facts and then putting together the right communications and marketing plans, we can actually move the needle in what is a very contentious area, as we know right now, given all the news.
There's no shortage of data and insights and analytics, is there? It's just actually knowing what to do with them and how to use them smartly.
That's exactly right, Steve. Exactly right.
All right, we could chat for ages, actually. There's so many interesting things. But let's get into the news items.
Okay.
And, Frank, let's start with Roseanne. I mean, wow, what can we say? That was the perfect lesson about not tweeting when you are maybe not at your best, shall we say? Or maybe when you're...
But what if you haven't been at your best for 20 years?
Well, that's harsh. But maybe true, yeah. Yeah, well, clearly...
Well, that's my thing about this story, is that ABC knew what they were getting into when they signed her to do this show. They know that she'd been tweeting conspiracy theories and other crazy things for years. And I don't know, this maybe shouldn't have surprised them that much.
Yeah, no, I saw her on Fallon with John Goodman, and Goodman was sort of cringing at some of the things she was saying. Or Kimmel, not Fallon. But tell us what happened, and let's talk about it, because the company involved handled it rather well, I thought.
Yeah, I'd like to say it's hard to believe, but sadly it's not. So anyway, earlier this week, Roseanne Barr, who of course is the star and the personality behind the Roseanne show, which came back to ABC after
just finished its first run.
Was about to, and had huge ratings in the first few weeks it was back. She tweeted some racist remarks about Valerie Jarrett, who was, of course, is the former, one of the top aides to President Barack Obama. And then, sort of tried to apologize after an internet outrage ensued. And she then later, so after ABC said they were going to cancel the sitcom, she said she was doing some Ambien tweeting. And Ambien, of course, is made by Sanofi. And Sanofi then tweeted a few hours later that while all pharmaceutical treatments have side effects, racism is not a known side effect of any Sanofi medication. In the rare case of a pharma brand dropping the mic on social media and then just walking away and not commenting further. So
it was one of the best examples you're ever likely to see, actually. Isn't
right.
it?
So when I was doing morning newsletter research this morning, I was, even having covered this yesterday, a little bit surprised at how much press Sanofi was still getting into this morning news cycle. And I think mostly positive, somewhat admiring press that they actually went forward with that tweet.
Michael, you've got pharma brands. You've been in situations like that, I guess. What's the process? Is that where you do have to get the legal involved before you can actually tweet that? Or, can you be a bit bolder and just sort of say, well, this is out of line and we've got to address it?
Yeah, well, first of all, I thought what they did was outstanding. It doesn't surprise me that it's really seeped into the conscious and the narrative, no matter where you go.
Yeah.
But what made it particularly interesting, if you step back and dissect the total statement, clearly it did get approved by legal. You could tell that. But also, you have to understand the character of your organization. Right, and I think for Sanofi, which is a smaller pharmaceutical company, not based here in the U.S., and I thought it was really in keeping with their character. So, I'm not sure J&J would have said the same thing, but I'm very confident we would have responded in a way that was within the character of our brand and our organization.
Yeah, and what kicks into action? Because this tweet happened at 2:45 in the morning. US time, didn't it? Although I guess being outside the US might have helped in this
Well,
occasion.
she lives in Hawaii, evidently.
Okay.
Which
She
is,
does,
yes,
right,
was
yeah.
part of the time difference.
Right. So what do you have? You obviously have to be 24/7.
So interestingly, we actually have what's called a trigger event process, believe it or not, where this would have been a trigger event, and we have a pretty robust, simple process where if something happens where it's likely to impact the reputation of Johnson & Johnson, then we quickly pull together a team, including our CEO, Alex Gorski, within 2 hours. We assess the situation, and then within 6 hours, we're ready to make, we have a plan, and we're ready to announce that plan. And again, that's just been based upon things that have happened to us where you have to, in this environment, you've got to be quick, but you can't be too quick.
Even if it's a holding statement.
Yeah, you have to be out there with something, and I do think more often than not, companies have gotten themselves in trouble by actually moving too quickly before really gaining alignment within their organization, trying to understand the sentiment of different stakeholders. But clearly, whatever Sanofi did, the statement itself was certainly legally approved, but then it just had that little quip that made it perfect. So hats off to them.
Nice bit of copywriting, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
It is.
And that's a skill that's always been there, hasn't it?
So I'm sure from now there'll be a lot of people who will take credit for it.
Of course. Yeah, I mean it's and then Disney got involved because the president tweeted, "Why didn't Bob Iger?" Like it's got anything to do with the president, and they just adopted a. Let's ignore that, and that was very effective as well.
No upside to getting into a verbal warfare with members of government.
Right. Good. That's a good quote from this podcast. If people take away nothing apart from that, and Roseanne's been doubling down, hasn't she? And my castmates threw me under the bus, and she's not. She's not gone dark on social. That's for sure.
No, she hasn't.
Yeah,
though she vowed to quit, and then she came back like 6 hours later.
Yeah, we've all vowed to quit all sorts of things, haven't we? Anyway, we'll talk about another one of those with Starbucks, actually, a little bit later in the show. But let's first talk about some more departures at Burson, Cohn & Wolfe.
Yeah.
Quite senior people, and mostly on the Burson side of the coin.
Right, exactly. So, again, continued shakeout from the merger of Burson Marsteller and Cohn & Wolfe a few months ago. The latest person to step down is the worldwide president at BCW, as it's now known, Kevin Bell, who is really well-known, well-respected guy on your side of the pond, if I can say that.
There's a few that get respect.
He's a veteran of Maitland political Fleischman Hillard, and helped to found Westminster Strategy, which was a forerunner to Bell Pottinger earlier in his career. So he is retiring, effective tomorrow.
Is this the new phrase, retiring, for people who basically are,
I guess that remains to be seen.
Because
we'll see
been a few people retired who suddenly pop up in another job 6 months later.
That's right. We'll
retiring from that job.
We will see if Mr. Bell pops up in a role, momentarily. And also Margaret Key, who was formerly the Asia-Pacific leader over at Burson Marsteller, has moved over to Zeno Group to become their Asia-Pacific.
Yeah, interesting hire for Zeno. And Margaret was kind of a little bit sidelined, I guess, in the first restructure after the agency. So look, these are two big agencies, and Burson is twice the size of Cohn & Wolfe, and there's bound to be lots of changes, personnel. There has to be. There's no point merging organisations like that. I don't know if you probably can't talk about it specifically. Do you use those agencies around the world? Or?
We have used Burson, most definitely. And look, as you said, Steve, when you've got the upheaval that's happening in the media landscape, these things are going to happen. We tend to be, loyal to our agencies, and like any group, it's based on the quality of the individuals. So I don't know if we've had any discussions with the new merged entity, but I'm sure we'll be talking to them in the future.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's go and talk about another sort of crisis situation, Starbucks. I think this one emerged over a weekend as well, didn't it, where the police were called at a Starbucks in Philadelphia. Right. Starbucks didn't react particularly well initially on that occasion, I think it's fair to say, but they got back on track and decided to shut their stores for half a day for racial bias training. Tell us a little bit about that, Frank. And,
so two of our excellent journalists, Perry Simpson, who is with us
including Perry Simpson behind the dials.
Behind the dials, yes. And our associate news editor, Diana Bradley, went out and talked to some customers at Starbucks yesterday, or I'm sorry, on Tuesday, when they were doing the racial bias training. And Perry, correct me if I'm wrong, step in, but there was a lot of confusion about Starbucks, not necessarily with customers not really knowing that they were going to be open, closed, or what the situation was, right?
Half of the people we talked to had no idea what was going on, more or less.
So, I think it shows that perhaps Starbucks could have communicated better to their customer base, when they were going to be open, what places were going to be open and closed, and things like that.
Perry, it seems to me this is a snapshot on one store, but it's a busy store on 7th Avenue in Manhattan, so it's not a bad bellwether, But it seemed like, on the surface, a lot of the African-American customers knew about it and had an opinion about it, but actually a lot of the white customers didn't know about it and would, like, why is my coffee shop shut, sort of thing.
Yeah,
is that unfair, or was that the sort of vibe you were getting on the street?
I would say it's fair, but it was a very small sample size, so there's caveats. But yeah, that was the general sense I was getting, that a lot of the white customers did not know what was going on. They just kind of either ignored us completely or and walked to try another store. One woman said she thought that they were closing for construction. So,
well, that one has got some scaffolding outside it, hasn't it?
That's true.
It has done for about the last 2 years. Not unusual in Manhattan.
Yeah, I think that the black population knew what was going on, minus like 1 or 2 people.
And did people generally think that Starbucks had done a good thing by going down this route? And,
it seems like it, yeah. It did seem like it.
Yeah. Michael, what did you think? It was an unfortunate incident in Philadelphia that clearly wasn't dealt with particularly well, was it? And
yeah, well, I actually live outside of Philadelphia, so I was able to follow it pretty closely on the news, and I do think the initial reaction was a bit ham-handed. But I think they did ultimately the right thing. Look, this is not an issue that's the sole province of Starbucks by any means, and so taking the action that they did, look, some people are going to always have a cynical view towards these things, but I think any attempt, particularly for a corporation like that, we should see as a net positive. At J&J, we actually do very similar training. So we do unconscious bias training and have been doing for about the last 12 months or so, with a goal to get 100% of our employees trained. And right now, we've got about 35% of them trained. And it's very powerful, because it's not just a black or white thing, but it's just about, the unconscious bias that all of us have. It's kind of like the air we breathe and the water we drink. We don't really think about it, and we really want people to stop and think, and then hopefully it ends up changing your behavior. So it's not about trying to change people's belief system, but when you're operating within the ecosystem of a company or an organization, it's really about the behavior express, and that's what we're trying to get people to do. Yeah.
Well, as a company operating in this sort of political and cultural environment, we've seen a lot of other incidents recently where police have been called just because someone happens to have seen someone around who they're fairly conscious bias, actually, in those cases, has kicked in, and a lot of people have got caught up in it. How much do companies have to take a stand on these social and cultural issues, and how much should they stick to their knitting and just sell goods and make money for shareholders? You've obviously every company's had to deal with that, not just over the last couple of years, but in general.
And look, we take the approach that we are part of the community, local communities and the world community at large, and at the same time, you can't comment on everything, otherwise, actually, your voice kind of starts to get drowned out. So, in our discussions, as an executive committee, we spend a fair amount of time talking about things that are really consistent with our values. So, if there are things that really have a detrimental impact to our employees, or to our customers, or certainly to mothers or fathers, where we think our voice will be a positive in the conversation, then we'll speak out. But at the same time, you do have to be careful, because we are, at the end of the day, we're in the business of healthcare, So we try and remember the swim lane we're in. But I will say, in this environment, I do think customers and consumers and other stakeholders are expecting companies to certainly be more engaging and to have a point of view. Now, whenever you do that, you're going to risk, by definition, upsetting half the people. I mean, that's just the way it is today.
Yeah.
So you have to be careful and you have to be measured in what you're trying to say. But I do think what people should take out of all these experiences is make sure that as managers and people in the company that you're having those conversations beforehand, and so you know what you're gonna lend your voice to, and perhaps what you may not when the opportunity or the issue arises.
Yeah, it seems that customers, staffers, investors want to know where the company stands on certain issues. But as you said, you're a global company and you've got people working for you and customers of all different types as well. So it's not a one thing's right and one thing's wrong situation.
You're absolutely right, and particularly, again, you can inadvertently get yourself in a really difficult situation if all you're thinking about is one slice of that pie.
Yeah.
If all you're thinking about is the U.S. market as opposed to all the other markets you serve, or you could look at it through any number of lenses. So that's why you have to be, I would say, very intentional and very thoughtful.
Yeah, no, for sure. Let's finish on Martin Sorrell. Frank, wouldn't be a podcast without a Martin Sorrell story. And he's keeping in the news, isn't he? And he's not being shy. He's going to be at Cannes. He's going to be interviewed with Ken Orletta, I think. He's got an interesting new book out. And,
but will he have acquired a firm by the time Cannes rolls around?
I don't know. Will he be wearing his shorts? These are all the big questions that we want to know. Frank, tell us about
I really don't want to know the answer to that, but thank you very much.
Tell us about his new venture.
So he has put a pretty hefty personal investment behind acquiring S4 Capital, which is, the word is he's going to use as a shell company to acquire agencies, much in the same way he did with WPP 30 years ago and less.
Yeah.
So this is a really interesting story to watch. Obviously, he did not have a non-compete when he left WPP, and now he can go out and do this. Now, my question about this is, how long would it take for him to actually build a competitive network? I mean, it's one thing to say you're going to go out and buy a bunch of firms, but how many big firms are there available to start with that you could actually do that?
Yeah, well, he was going from more of a standing start with wire and plastic products, in that he had no heritage there. Well, he had a bit of heritage at Saatchi's, but he's done it and he's pretty well known. So, but I guess he's not going to build something the size of. Well, who knows? I mean, you never know. We never.
Well, and there's
never
been
all that things out with Martin Sorrell.
There's been a report out there that he's interested in Cantor.
Yeah.
So.
I don't see why that's. I mean, I can see why analysts and people who want to unlock value for making money out of it would want to get that out of WPP. I don't see why WP would want to do that. But Sir Martin Sorrell's sort of great figure in marketing and communications, and we need advocates for our industries because there aren't enough of them actually. So I guess it's good that he's staying in the industry in a way, because of being a thought leader. But so, any observations on his sort of what's happened over the last few months?
Look, Martin, and I know Martin well. Look, Martin's a smart guy. And he built a very successful organization. We are a client of WPP, and I would expect, and I haven't spoken to Martin directly in the last few weeks, but I would suspect that he's going to be deliberate in terms of the things he goes after. He recognizes, as someone who's in the industry, he recognizes where the future lies and perhaps the things that aren't part of the future, and he'll be smart in terms of what he starts to build around that.
Yeah, he doesn't have to turn a tanker around. He can literally sort of build something from scratch. Yeah, well, there'll be a lot of chat about that at Cannes in a couple of weeks. So we'll follow that story. We've launched our Diversity Distinction in PR Awards again for 2018, and we do that with the PR Council. Michael, while you're here, I wanted to ask you. The issue of diversity in PR is obviously a big issue, just like it is in society and business generally.
Yes,
I think it's generally considered that there's more diversity in-house than there is in agencies, and people like Terod Neptune at Lenovo and previously at Verizon and HP and companies like that have started actually making diversity a specific tenet of the agencies that they
Yeah.
work with. How are you approaching that, and how important is that for you? And obviously, as someone who's made it from a diverse background, made it to the top in the profession, it's fantastic. You're a great role model for people, and that's one of the complaints about agencies, that there aren't enough senior, diverse individuals for young PR pros to aspire to. What's your sort of take on that?
I think that's all true. I do think that it's something that has to come from the top of the organization. And I do think you see more diversity in comms organizations inside companies because companies have made it a priority. And that starts with our CEO, and it goes down through each of his executives, including myself, in terms of how are we doing. And we get rated on that, and it's, what gets measured gets done. And so I think the agencies have the opportunity to do that, but it starts at the top. I mean, there is no other place to point the finger. And as long as the CEOs and heads of agencies are not making that a priority, it will not change over time. So I think in terms of having someone like a J&J or other companies demand that of agencies, that's certainly not our style to do that. But we are heavily encouraging it. We certainly, from our procurement group, it's certainly one of the things that they look at. But again, that's something that you can't legislate, you certainly can't dictate, but it's something that has to be, again, driven by the top leadership in agencies. And until that happens, until they really make it a strategic priority, it's really just talk.
Yeah. And, people have been talking about this for a long time, haven't they? Decades. So, there needs to be some more action for sure. But with the diversity awards are there to sort of celebrate the good stuff that is being
certainly,
done.
and there is a lot of good progress.
Yeah,
so I don't want to minimize that.
No, for sure. So do make sure if you get your initiatives in and get rewarded for that and exposure, because it's all about exposure too. And we've also got our Hall of Fame event next week, which is in New York City on June the 6th. So if you haven't got your ticket for that, do check out PRWeek.com. We'll be in Cannes in 2 weeks from this weekend. Haymarket at Cannes.com. Check out our schedule of events. We'll be doing lots of coverage from there. We have our conference in Chicago in October the 18th. Really pleased and excited to take it out of New York. And look out for our PR Week Awards Uncovered event to help you get your PR Week Awards entry. But that's all we've got time for. We've had a great show, actually. Really enjoyed it, Michael. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome,
and
Steve.
Good luck with all those changes and the sort of relaunch of the baby care line. And we'll look forward to writing about that. But that's all we got time for. We'll see you next time on the PR Week.